In 1946, a number of critical events occurred that shaped my political development and the directions of the struggle. The mine workers' strike, in which 70,000 African miners along the reef went on strike, affected me greatly. At the initiative of J.B. Marx, Dan Thoulon, Claire Radebe, and a number of ANC labor activists, the African Mine Workers Union had been created in the early 1940s. There were as many as 400,000 African miners working on the reef, most of them making no more than 2 shillings a day. The union leadership had repeatedly pressed the Chamber of Mines for a minimum wage of 10 shillings a day, as well as family housing and 2 weeks paid leave. The chamber ignored the union's demands. In one of the largest such actions in South African history, the miners went on strike for a week and maintained their solidarity. The state's retaliation was ruthless. The leaders were arrested, the compound surrounded by police, and the AMWU offices ransacked. A march was brutally repulsed by police. 12 miners died. The Natives Representative Council adjourned in protest. I had a number of relations who were mine workers, and during the week of the strike I visited them, discussed the issues, and expressed my support. J.B. Marx, a long-time member of the ANC and the Communist Party, was then president of the African Mine Workers Union. Born in the Transvaal of mixed parentage, Marx was a charismatic figure with a distinctive sense of humor. He was a tall man with a light complexion. During the strike, I sometimes went with him from mine to mine, talking to workers and planning strategy. From morning to night, he displayed cool and reasoned leadership, with his humor leavening even the most difficult crisis. I was impressed by the organization of the union and its ability to control its membership, even in the face of such savage opposition. In the end, the state prevailed. The strike was suppressed and the union crushed. The strike was the beginning of my close relationship with Marx. I visited him often at his house and we discussed my opposition to communism at great length. Marx was a stalwart member of the party, but he never took my objections personally and felt that it was natural for a young man to embrace nationalism, but that as I grew older and more experienced, my views would broaden. I had these same discussions with Moses Kotane and Yusuf Dadoo, both of whom believed, like Marx, that communism had to be adapted to the African situation. Other communist members of the ANC condemned me and the other youth leaguers, but Marx, Kotane, and Dadoo never did. After the strike, 52 men, including Kotane and Marx and many other communists, were arrested and prosecuted, first for incitement, then for sedition. It was a political trial, an effort by the state to show that it was not soft on the Red Menace. That same year, another event forced me to recast my whole approach to political work. In 1946, the Smuts government passed the Asiatic Land Tenure Act, which curtailed the free movement of Indians, circumcised the areas where Indians could reside and trade, and severely restricted their right to buy property. In return, they were provided with representation in parliament by token white surrogates. Dr. Dadoo, president of the Transvaal Indian Congress, castigated the restrictions and dismissed the offer of parliamentary representation as a spurious offer of a sham franchise. This law, known as the Ghetto Act, was a grave insult to the Indian community and anticipated the Group Areas Act, which would eventually circumscribe the freedom of all South Africans of color. The Indian community was outraged and launched a concerted 2-year campaign of passive resistance to oppose the measures led by Dr. Dadoo and Dr. J.M. Naicker, president of the Natal Indian Congress. The Indian community conducted a mass campaign that impressed us with its organization and dedication. Housewives, priests, doctors, lawyers, traders, students, and workers took their place in the front lines of the protest. For 2 years, people suspended their lives to take up the battle. Mass rallies were held. Land reserved for whites was occupied and picketed. No fewer than 2,000 volunteers went to jail, and Dr. Dadoo and Dr. Naicker were sentenced to 6 months hard labor. The campaign was confined to the Indian community, and the participation of other groups was not encouraged. Even so, Dr. Zuma and other African leaders spoke at several meetings, and along with the Youth League gave full moral support to the struggle of the Indian people. The government crippled the rebellion with harsh laws and intimidation. but we in the Youth League and the ANC had witnessed the Indian people register an extraordinary protest against color oppression in a way that Africans and the ANC had not. Ismail Mir and J.N. Singh suspended their studies, said goodbye to their families, and went to prison. Ahmed Kathrada, who was still a high school student, did the same thing. I often visited the home of Amina Pahad for lunch, and then suddenly this charming woman put aside her apron and went to jail for her beliefs. If I had once questioned the willingness of the Indian community to protest against oppression, I no longer could. The Indian campaign became a model for the type of protest that we in the Youth League were calling for. It instilled a spirit of defiance and radicalism among the people, broke the fear of prison, and boosted the popularity and influence of the NIC and TIC. They reminded us that the freedom struggle was not merely a question of making speeches, holding meetings, passing resolutions, and sending deputations, but of meticulous organization, militant mass action, and above all, the willingness to suffer and sacrifice. The Indians' campaign harkened back to the 1913 passive resistance campaign in which Mahatma Gandhi led a tumultuous procession of Indians crossing illegally from Natal to the Transvaal. That was history. This campaign was taking place before my own eyes. Early in 1946, Evelyn and I moved to a 2-room municipal house of our own in Orlando East, and thereafter to a slightly larger house at number 8115 Orlando West. Orlando West was a dusty Spartan area of boxy municipal houses that would later become part of Greater Soweto, Soweto being an acronym for Southwestern Townships. Our house was situated in an area nicknamed Westcliff by its residents after the fancy white suburb to the north. The rent of our new home was $17.6 per month. The house itself was identical to hundreds of others built on postage stamp size plots on dirt roads. It had the same standard tin roof, the same cement floor, a narrow kitchen, and a bucket toilet at the back. Although there were street lamps outside, we used paraffin lamps outside as the homes were not yet electrified. The bedroom was so small that a double bed took up almost the entire floor space. These houses were built by the municipal authorities for workers who needed to be near town. To relieve the monotony, some people planted small gardens or planted their doors in bright colors. It was the very opposite of grand, but it was my first true home of my own, and I was mightily proud. A man is not a man until he has a house of his own. I did not know then that it would be the only residence that would be entirely mine for many, many years. The state had allocated the house to Evelyn and me because we were no longer just 2 but 3. That year, our first son, Madiba Thembekele, was born. He was given my clan name of Madiba but was known by the nickname Thembi. He was a solid, happy little boy who most people said resembled his mother more than his father. I had now produced an heir, though I had little as yet to bequeath to him. But I had perpetuated the Mandela name and the Madiba clan, which is one of the basic responsibilities of a Xhosa male. I finally had a stable base, and I went from being a guest in other people's homes to having guests in my own. My sister Liabil joined us, and I took her across the railway line to enroll her at Orlando High School. In my culture, all the members of one's family have a claim to the hospitality of any other member of the family. The combination of my large extended family and my new house meant a great number of guests. I enjoyed domesticity even though I had little time for it. I delighted in playing with Thembi, bathing him and feeding him, and putting him to bed with a little story. In fact, I love playing with children and chatting with them. It has always been one of the things that makes me feel most at peace. I enjoyed relaxing at home, reading quietly, taking in the sweet and savory smells of emanating from pots boiling in the kitchen, but I was rarely at home to enjoy these things. During the latter part of the year, the Reverend Michael Scott came to stay with us. Scott was an Anglican clergyman and a great fighter for African rights. He had been approached by a man named Komu who was representing a squatter camp outside Johannesburg that the government was seeking to relocate. Como wanted Scott to protest against the removal. Scott said, "If I am going to help you, I must be one of you." And he proceeded to move to the squatter camp and start a congregation there. Scott's shanty town for the homeless was built near a rocky knoll, and the residents christened it Tobruk. After the battle in the North Africa campaign of the war, it was a place I sometimes took Thembi on Sunday morning, as he liked to play hide and seek among the rocks. After Scott had set up his congregation, he found that Como was embezzling money from people who were contributing to the fight against the removal. When Scott confronted Como, Como drove Scott out of the camp and threatened his life. Scott took refuge with us in Orlando and brought along an African priest named Dlamini, who also had a wife and children. Our house was tiny and Scott slept in the sitting room. Dlamini and his wife slept in another room, and we put all the children in the kitchen. Michael Scott was a modest, unassuming man, but Dlamini was a bit hard to take.